This video was made with a strictly Season 0 perspective, if you can't tell from the length it took me longer than I expected to make this, so small bits of information like numbers may be outdated, and a couple other points, but I address those later on either way, so sorry about that, but I hope you enjoy. Well lads, sure is an angry mob out there. You'd think that all I did was tell them about Barry's household instead of a lion's, but actually all I did was have a different opinion to a game that they like. Would it be funny if I did it again, or does this opening make me look like enough of an arsehole without the extra help? Marvel Rivals has some of the most intriguing, fun and intuitive hero design I have seen in a hero shooter not called Overwatch or Paladins, but it also has some of the strangest, clunkiest and off-feeling design choices right beside its best work, though I should clarify something by putting the sign up. The things I'm about to say should not be considered as objective fact, whether or not you agree with me. I find Marvel Rivals to be a pretty fun discussion topic, so discuss I shall. If you were to go around the community and asking who their highlights of the cast are and who they'd say needs some works, you'll get different answers across the board. And most interestingly, it's not often a case of a loud minority really loving or hating aspects of any one character, but rather a near perfect 50-50 split of opinions on different characters, with some people thinking Hulk jump feels clunky and others being wrong. Now I have spoken about the hero design already, albeit briefly, and I mainly focus in on the tanks, so I'll try not to repeat myself too much, aside from when I have no choice, like I already have. As I've already alluded to, I believe there to be two sides to the hero design in Marvel Rivals, the damn near perfect specimens and the divisive individuals. Not to imply the more divisive characters are bad or anything of that sort, but rather they're the characters you see the most differing opinions on, while the perfect specimens are universally agreed on as such, just being incredibly well designed characters. The easiest example, just to make sure we're all on the same page, is Spider-Man. When it comes to hero design, expectation is an important element. Expectation will spawn from the visual design for a lot of people, and in the case of Marvel Rivals, we're not only working with the visual design, but the art design itself, because these are Marvel characters. And in Spider-Man's case, everyone knows Spider-Man, meaning everyone holds an expectation of how they would expect Spider-Man to play in-game. And in Rivals, he holds up to this expectation extremely well. His gameplay is intuitive, from the expectation you would hold from his character. He's also just fun as fuck, but that's not really the point. My point is that Spider-Man is a character with very few issues in terms of his kit design. Sure, his ult may be a bit contentious for some, but that's only when playing against him, and a few number changes fixes that if it actually is a genuine problem. When you play Spider-Man, you feel like Spider-Man. So while characters like Spider-Man and more that I'll eventually mention have intuitive kits in which very few differing opinions exist, it does mean that they lead to a slightly less nuanced discussion in comparison to the more divisive characters, such as the one I would believe to be the poster child of. Of course it's a tank. I have to admit, I was wrong about Thor. His best ability would actually be his shift in close range point contesting scenarios, and he's not as terrible as I made him out to seem. So to that end, I have to apologise. Thor players, you're cooking. Despite that, I still hate him. Entirely because of the shared cooldowns. As a concept, I don't mind these. It enforces proper ability management, so you can't just roll your face over the keyboard, but having a 2-second lockout to 3 of your 4 abilities does lead him to feeling limiting in my opinion, which applies across the cast. As a brief tangent, tanks generally need to be flexible. They need to swap between offense and defense on the fly. It's the nature of being on the front line, but the longer cooldowns the tanks tend to have result in gameplay that just feels like you have less control sometimes. Take Captain America, who has a 3-second cooldown on raising a shield. Sure, it reflects projectiles, but also a 3-second cooldown on raising a shield just feels off. I'm not trying to say that Venom should be able to summon his 800 HP shield every 5 seconds, but just that some cooldowns venture into the slightly too long territory. So obviously with Thor, the issue is pretty apparent. I think a saving grace could be found for that by making his passive remove 1 second off his cooldowns if he hits someone when Mjolnir is charged, meaning he get a stack of Thor Force back and a second off with it. Potentially too powerful, but I would see it as making him feel more fluid while also rewarding good positioning and rewarding that cooldown management even better. Alternatively, just give him individual cooldowns. I mean, that also works, I guess, but I think the other idea is just a little bit better for the players who do currently love his gameplay as it is right now, as few and far between as they seem to be. A lot of people, myself previously included, felt Thor's best game plan was just to spam F off cooldown since it was the best damage, range and all that he had, and I would believe that this stems from the fact that looking at his kit creates this expectation all because of little Mjolnir. What is the intuitive game plan for Thor? Because his abilities share the same cooldown, every player is going to hold one to a higher standard, meaning you have two options. Shift, which would be the choice of the more experienced Thor, and F, the option most new players will gravitate towards because it's the biggest looking and feeling. In both scenarios, his right click is not acknowledged. The most you see it used for is animation cancels on his melees or to finish off a low health enemy who's too far away. In both situations, Mjolnir, a massive part of Thor's character, feels like a footnote. What I'm saying is that hammer throw doesn't feel worth your time. It's absolutely useful. If an enemy is running away on low health, or if you want to animation cancel for your melee, it is great, but it doesn't have the same feeling of power that his shift and F have, which usually would never be a problem if it weren't for those shared cooldowns. It's all about the opportunity cost. Sharing cooldowns is a great idea to create an engaging gameplay loop, but every ability needs to be of equal value, so a choice is always there to be made. Thor's right click's only purpose is damage, and just that. It is only damage. If you want damage, the Awaken state is right there, ready to output more. The only reason to use it over Awaken is simply the fact that it can animation cancel, but when in the range to animation cancel, a good chunk of the time, you'd nearly prefer to charge your dash to bring whoever you're smacking into an even better position for yourself. I've already stated my piece on Thor. Even understanding the better way to play him, I still feel like he plays in a clunky fashion, part of which stems from the shared cooldowns, but another comes from his right click just feeling underwhelming. I and a lot of others don't feel like Thor when playing Thor, something I believe could be fixed by making his right click emphasize the boomerang aspect that it already has. It does 70 damage on impact and 30 on return, so why not make it more controllable? Why not let Thor decide when Mjolnir gets pulled back? And on the opportunity cost point, why not give it a little utility? A minor slow of some variety, some extra bonus health if the hammer hits the same target twice, anything to set it apart and give it the impact that it deserves. I find Thor to be in this divisive camp because his kit limits him to only going for one play at a time. Well, before I was going for the wrong play in every scenario because I just thought his F was insane, when it's actually a lot more situational than I realized, even after realizing his shift is more inherently powerful and more importantly flexible, it doesn't change the fact that I can only go for an Awaken state or a reposition and displacement on an enemy in any one situation. Does the God of Thunder really have to wait to throw his hammer after dashing? And don't even get me started on his ultimate. This thing is just odd, but sure look, it does the job, so I've been whining enough about him anyway.
The big thing that I'm getting at is the characters with the most discussion potential are the ones that have different expectations for them from players, and more notably, the characters that don't have an intuitive style. Basically meaning that all the characters I can talk about for double the length of Spider-Man are characters where people will argue over which aspect of their kit is bad. Just to take Thor as an example again, you see an ability which costs all of your resources and your immediate thought is going to be, damn, that must be his strongest one. And on that note, these thoughts aren't just always going to come from knowledge on their lore. I mean, if you're anything like me, the only thing you knew about Marvel was stuff that you just learned against your will by existing during 2018. Most of the time, you're just going to be looking at their kit to see what they do, but in most cases, that's going to be more than enough. Just take Luna Snow. No one knew her before Marvel Rivals. She came from a Marvel mobile game and has like 2 comics about her, so the only way you're going to have any idea as to what she actually does is going to be by looking at her kit. But from there, you can pretty easily intuit that she's going to be a bit of a backline support who also has some solid dueling potential, but she still has a flexible gameplay loop thanks to her stun and that beam version of her primary fire where you need to have good positioning to get the most out of it. For the sake of my own argument, I'm going to ignore the 12 seconds of her not letting anyone die. That's a different discussion entirely.
And speaking of the supports, I'm going to take a moment to sing off and suck the praises of NetEase for creating Loki. By far my favorite clone character in any game. Think about what the expectation for Loki would be. If you're coming from the comics, then you're expecting underhanded tactics, anything that puts his trickster god character into full effect. And if you're just looking at the kit, regardless of if you know about the comics or not, you can already tell his playstyle involves fooling the enemies with his clones. The clones themselves, and even the clone swapping he also has, gives him an immense amount of choice. His intuitive playstyle has options. He can set up clones near his allies so they're guaranteed to be within his shift. Clones can be set up on further away high ground so Loki can teleport to them and escape. You could even just place a clone in your backline and go on an invisible adventure to the enemy while they think you're somewhere with your team. Now I will also say his invisibility and backstab nearly never come up in a real game, but they are nice additions that would fit well if they were a little bit stronger. He's another great example of some of the brilliant hero design that Rivals has to offer, which also acts as proof that the more divisive characters can receive just some minor tweaks to feel at home alongside the greats.
The best way that I could describe what I would call the greats of Marvel Rivals hero design, or really just hero design and character design in general in these types of games, is flexibility. Characters should have a wide array of options and possibilities within their kits, but I don't just mean having like twice the abilities that another character does to grant them those options. I just mean the base abilities in their kits should have multiple use cases. A better feeling, or put bluntly, good hero design is one that has flexibility within its kits and its abilities. The easiest example by far is just any form of mobility. It's got offensive, defensive, positioning, dodging, and all these other buzzwords worth of possibilities. In some cases it's obvious to see, and in others you need to dig a little bit deeper, but there's rarely ever an ability with just one case that it can be used, but if there is, we've got a problem. As a brief side note, just take Venom. He can only go for the same ability rotation every single time, every single fight, because it's all his abilities do. The swing will only let him go in. I know I just praised mobility earlier, and he does have that aspect going for him, but his shield, the right click, all of these other elements can only do the one job they need to, which is just having a budget wrecking ball from Overwatch. It could be argued that Mantis doesn't have this flexibility because of the nature of her abilities, but I would say that that argument falls apart once you realize that there's a resource meter she needs to abide by. So she needs to balance her damage boosts and her heals with her 4 charges, or she has to decide if she wants to preload heals onto someone because of the timer that they have if they're about to go out of her LOS. But now, there's one character in which I only have one word to describe my thoughts on them. I'm quite the Iron Fist fan, but sweet Jesus, he's got his problems.
I do really like Iron Fist. His wall running is fun, the jumps make him feel so responsive, and his kick is fluid both in and out of combat. With the multiple movement abilities he's already got the early signs of a good design. His heal grants him bonus HP, which means it can be used before and after fights. All of this seems great. I mean, his block is a little bit basic, but for a melee character in a game like this, it's needed, and the damage afterwards is not too bad whatsoever. What could the problem be?
I tried to drop my clone and then teleport, but I just fucking failed miserably.
You fought with I fucking love Iron Fist! Oh yeah. Iron Fist is weird. The easiest way to describe him is a beginner character. You can't get much more beginner friendly than auto aim. The most common thing with these types of beginner characters is how often they fall off the higher you go, which is true of Iron Fist as well. As players get smarter, they'll get jumped by him way less often. But with his auto-targeted dash and extra mobility, making him hard to hit while he also has to try in order to miss you, the lower you go, the more of a menace he is. Though his divisiveness isn't like Thor, where a lot of players misunderstand something, but even then the players who do understand have their problems. I've not seen a soul defend those shared cooldowns in their current state. When it comes to Iron Fist, he's just simply your typical pub stomper. The first week of the release was filled with hatred for himself and Scarlet Witch, and now that more time has passed, you see way less of it because people have learned to deal with them. I want to preface that beginner characters are perfectly fine. If anything, they should be encouraged because games only get harder to get into as time goes on. Take the Punisher. As much as I hate him for how utterly boring he is since he's just a dude with guns, he's got a low skill floor and a damn near infinite skill ceiling that comes with aiming. A very good way to create a beginner-friendly character. When it comes to Iron Fist, and while we're here, Scarlet Witch as well, they don't really have this equivalent, alongside their nature leading them to live and die by their numbers. Sure, Scarlet has a projectile and Iron Fist is melee, so naturally he needs to have a different approach to positioning so he doesn't get nuked. But those just don't compare to other, more simple characters like Jeff or Venom, where both positioning and aim are factors they can work towards. I'm not trying to imply that auto-aim can't exist, it's fine. On Scarlet Witch it's grand, but this man is a different beast. The main problem with Iron Fist is just in his simple nature. It's been proven with most beginner characters in gaming that he'll struggle in higher elos because any buffs in his base state will make him overwhelming for less skillful players. It's because of this that now a lot of higher rank players don't really care about him, and then lower rank ones make calls for things like Thanos snapping him out of existence because they just can't land their shots on him in the first place. And even in higher elos, he's pretty contentious because if he decides that he's on you, he's fucking on you. While he's got the flexibility in his regular abilities, it's the most important part of his kit, his primary fire and the dash that comes with it that doesn't have this. You can't precisely choose targets. On a ranged character with or without auto-targeting, this is fine. You still have the ability to reposition, you can literally just move your mouse if you need to swap targets. Like the very nature of controlling a shooter is flexible. This doesn't happen with Iron Fist. If you want to hit someone, your control is axed. I have had situations where because of the dash, my targeting changes, and even just for a second I end up dashing towards a target I don't even want to jump. I find there to be two sides to why people have problems with Iron Fist. One is obviously playing against him can just be frustrating since he'll run you over, but the other is that playing him surrenders control. The reason players love Spider-Man and Black Panther is that they can switch their targets on a dime, but Iron Fist doesn't have this same quality. In his case, it's more like... Hang on a second, I'm too Irish for this.
We'll go with nickel.
I know I presented a change I would like to see to Thor, and I don't want this to be a fixing Marvel Rivals characters video, so I want it to be known that pretty much all the suggestions I make for characters like these are mainly ones that would appease to just me in terms of playing them. I'm not saying that these should or shouldn't happen, just that I would enjoy it if these did come through. And with that in mind, I only have one thing to say to Iron Fist auto-targeting. I would like a gun. Possibly replaced with a new single dash he gets to use so he can still close distance, probably attached to the melee button or just higher base move speed so he can keep in range. I think it would still be fine for him to hang in the air while meleeing. I mean, Spider-Man has a similar variant and it is pretty fun, so I would see no harm there. You know, this has been far too much negativity. I think I need to clear my head of Marvel Rivals and connect with nature.
I am Groot.
No.
I am Groot.
No, I can't escape
I
this.
am Groot.
There's a character archetype that you often see in hero shooters, the builder, but a lot of the time they have their problems. Overwatch has Torbjorn and Symmetra who receive reworks to help them out since the builder identity just couldn't quite work. Apex has Caustic and Wattson, though in the Battle Royale their turtling style is a little unconventional, and even outside of hero shooters, builder characters persist. Look no further than Heimerdinger from League, who has about 4 players give or take. And of course there's Engineer TF2, I mean he basically pioneered the class. Generally, the builder archetype, while well enjoyed, tends to be on the unpopular end regardless because of their niche playstyles. However, I have to congratulate Marvel Rivals for making some of the more interesting builder designs, and more importantly, most fun builder designs I've ever played with. This section is supposed to be about Groot, but I need to give Penny credit where it's due first. Not only is she the most genuinely spider-like spider character with her nest and need to play around her webs to catch her prey, they also fixed a common issue a lot of players tend to have with builders, being that they're usually incredibly immobile since they're expected to huddle around their constructions. But she's a Spider-Verse character, so give her a web sling and a wall climb because it makes sense, and congrats, you've made one of the most fun defensive characters I've ever played. But what about Groot? Well, I've already torn into his team up with Jeff and Rocket, but we'll leave that to the side for a moment because it's adorable.
Walls. I love them. I spend every day surrounded by these things. They're fucking great. Honestly, my only complaint is that they're just not in complete sync with my every action.
I really like terrain creating abilities. In Overwatch, I'm a massive fan of Mei in a brawl comp to cut off enemies and sightlines to escape. So when I saw Groot was a tank with not one, but 2 types of walls, I was quite interested. Generally, walls are just that, walls, but Groot goes a step above this with different attributes attached to both types. So while yes, both are perfect when you just need to trap people in a room with you for as long as you can, they have diverging use cases for their unique traits on top of the immense amount of flexibility that just creating terrain offers. In case you're unaware, if Groot is near his wall, their special effect activates, with his shift damaging nearby enemies and his E granting him bonus health if Groot or any ally hits an enemy. The rest of his kit is entirely built around these 2 walls. Terrain creators that can deny paths often end up in close range, so he's got stronger melee hits with a stun on the 3rd one. And since the walls will often trap enemies in a tight space, you've got your right click for some solid AoE, and his ult plays off of all of these factors, giving Groot some well-deserved frag potential by just setting up around enemies you can grab. His kit plays incredibly well into itself. It's unbelievably intuitive, it clicks so fast, he's so flexible, and I've barely mentioned the fact that you can just put Groot walls literally anywhere. This guy can create the high ground wherever he wills it. Groot players are basically just playing Fortnite. While he isn't quite as traditional of a builder as Penny is, how a Groot builds his walls is what separates the Groot players from the Groot mains. I mean, if anything, it's just the load bearer between them. I will say though that Groot has some issues. The walls are a little bit spammy, and I'm definitely biased just because of the existence of these walls and the awaken mechanic on them, but I do have to admit it can get quite annoying to play against. Every DPS in Marvel Rivals is well made. The DPS roster has the most variety, both from its sheer amount of characters, but also all of their gameplay being unique. And I'd say a good part of this can be traced to 2 different things. One being that the DPS are just easier to design, and the other being that Nettie's game development history does show that they're a little bit more familiar with murder as a gameplay tool. But there's just one duelist that deviates from this. Just one that doesn't really feel like it earns a stamp of approval in terms of a well-rounded design. One that's pretty divisive when people get asked how they feel about them. I'm not implying that they aren't well made, they certainly are in concept at the very least, but their execution is another story. Storm can only be described as a contradiction. To start with the most important thing, more DPS that aren't just focused on doing damage are something I really want to see in games. The utility DPS has always been such a fun style to me, but it's so rare to see it done well. I already mentioned her earlier, but I believe Mei is the best utility DPS character ever made in this genre, but I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. Storm being a utility DPS is absolutely what brings a lot of people to find her strange. Unlike other DPS who want to take angles and flanks and try to fight some 1v1s, everything that would fit the duelist name, Storm doesn't do it. She wants to stay with as many teammates as she can so they all have the boost from her aura and its amped version. And the reverse applies as well. Her amped aura can affect enemies, so she wants to be right in the middle of a fight with as many people being affected by it as possible. And obviously with an AoE ult that doesn't immediately one-shot and some lower damage compared to most piercing projectiles, it's pretty clear that in a world of high burst damage DPS, where most operate off of if you're not at full health you're dead, Storm just doesn't fit in. She damages the whole crowd at once, chipping away while boosting her team. Every game you finish with a Storm player who knows what they're doing leads them to finishing it with more assists than kills. But all this is just a playstyle issue. Storm not having the same frag potential as someone like Psylocke naturally means most won't enjoy her, which is where most of this divisive nature was spawned from. But all of this is not how I feel about Storm whatsoever, so what exactly is my problem? You know what, fair point. She fills this niche of a more utility and team-oriented DPS that I love to see quite well, so what problem could be had? Well, she does fulfill it, but not smoothly. I'm sure you all get how she works. Speed aura, damage boost aura, basically Lucio if he transitioned and became a weather reader, all well and good. Thanks to the aura, she's a really solid way to boost your team's utility options if you're fine for damage. But there's one issue. She also flies. By itself, this sounds like a weird thing to point out. Like, yeah, she flies, what's the problem with that? Iron Man does as well and he's doing grand.
Brother, she flies. Look at her kit.
Everything in Storm's kit contradicts her ability to fly. The biggest offender is in her aura, because it's a sphere. Just a visual indicator so we're all on the same page. By having this aura, you want to be as close to as many teammates as possible, but since your reach gets smaller the further up into the sky you are, you want to be grounded so everyone gets the benefit as easily as possible. And the same concept applies to her primary fire since it pierces. You want to be on the same level as the enemy, which means you'd want to be on the floor. If you try to take people on from the sky, the piercing may as well have no purpose. And that's not even taking into account that thanks to trigonometry, her being in the sky leads her to do less damage because of the fall off that her wind blades have. Even with her ultimate, in terms of her regular positioning, you want to be closer to your team than the enemy, but when the ultimate finishes, you'll often be right in the middle of them, so half the time it's a death sentence you just use to force Luna Snow to use her own ult. I mean, the fact the flying character ult forces them to the ground when it finishes is just strange, even if she seems like she shouldn't fly half the time. When you grant a character the ability to fly, naturally you'd expect the character to be at their strongest in the air, since most of the characters never have this option. Look at Iron Man. He wants the angle that being in the air offers to make the best use of his AoEs, but in Storm's case, flying actively makes things worse for you. The one thing she has is the right click, and this ability is just a little bit underwhelming. But either way, Storm's kit is just criminally unintuitive, and not even because people try play her like a solo DPS instead of a team-reliant character. It's because her kit literally contradicts against itself all because of flight. It's as if the one reason she has it is just because she does it in the comics, because in a gameplay kit it makes no sense. And while I'm pointing out the problem flying has for Storm, let's look at the problems flying characters face in this game. Sure, we currently have two, but more are definitely on the way. To start with, just a general game feel point. Every character in this game moves at 6 meters per second. However, flying characters, despite sharing this, feel like they're slower than the rest. And I'd attribute this to the fact that they're literally just floating. Every grounded character has a walking animation, like no shit. They're all walking, we see them obeying physics, there's vertical motion as they walk, there's friction, gravity, all the other buzzwords you'd hear in 10 AM in your science class. Even Plok, who doesn't have legs, has a visible walking motion. When looking at the flyers, they lean in the direction they're going, but it's hard to get a grasp at their speed without terrain being near, which makes them feel sluggish. Storm with her speed aura is actually pretty fast and you can tell when you're near terrain of some kind, but once you're actually flying, a crazy thing to do on flying characters I know, it suddenly feels like a concrete block dragging sound effect. There's no blanket fix to this, but regardless, it does just make things feel off. However, on the note of flying characters feeling slower, fun fact, I lied, they actually are slower. When moving, flyers have a force applied in the direction they're going. But unlike other characters, they can move in literally any direction, left, right, up, down, and everything in between. but this results in their movement being slowed when traveling in more than one direction. The easiest way to show it is just moving diagonally up. When you think about it trigonometrically, it makes sense absolutely, but it feels so bad to play with, and in Storm's case, further disincentivizes her to fly because she'll be slower and thus an easier target to hit. Every other character doesn't have this experience when strafing and jumping, so why does it happen to the flyers and their equivalent of strafing and jumping? It's just strange. To return to Storm though, this time I am just saying that I think there's one thing she needs in order to actually have strength as a character. Allow me to demonstrate.
This is Storm's current aura. And this is all you have to do to fix it.
Genuinely, all she needs is this. There are other things I noticed while playing her. I think the lightning on her E could strike a little more frequently to make it feel better, but that could be too strong, and the fact you can't do anything while swapping her aura is so incredibly annoying when you're used to Lucio in Overwatch. I'll be reloading, so I don't need a damage boost, so I swap to speed and oops, I cancelled my reload. It's just another thing that leads her to not feeling smooth. Her right click is just aesthetic. In all honesty, an AoE or utility like a slow being added to it would give it more of a purpose than just its off cooldown time to damage someone. But all of this pales in comparison to the sheer joy I would feel in her aura having no vertical range. Her name is Storm. Storms don't give a fuck about your y-axis coordinates. She doesn't really need buffs to her damage or numbers. She's already very strong, but only when she's played in the opposite way her design invites you to think. All because of Flight having no synergy with any of her abilities. It's as if she was made with Flight not even being a part of the question, and then they remembered, oh yeah, that's kind of her thing. Though I think even if she didn't get the cylinder aura range, if she could swap auras while using her other abilities, how smooth she feels would skyrocket. While it stands, I do adore Storm. The utility DPS are always cases for such interesting new designs to come through, but so often they drop the ball in some regard. The same is happening for Storm, which is just a little disappointing. Before talking in detail about the final character I want to mention, there's just one last comment I want to give on the design, but since it's not about a full character, it can just go here. I've already mentioned previously how supports and rivals are really interesting, and this extends to their ultimates. Jeff, Loki, Cloak and Dagger, all really unique designs. Even Adam Warlock with Mass Res, which all my fellow Overwatch players probably expected to be horrific to deal with, is actually incredibly well balanced, which honestly applies to all the resurrection in this game, but that's a different discussion. There are two support ultimates, however, where I have an issue, and this isn't the general premise I've had with this is divisive, this is just pure opinion here. Mantis ult is just a lazy clone of Luna Snow, and a worse one at that. Ignoring how Luna has an ult that's just ridiculous in its length, she has Spectacle, it feels like an ultimate. When Mantis ults, people apparently can't die for 8 seconds, but it sure doesn't feel like it. She shouts and then we're just back to normal gameplay. Mantis and Luna are simple but very fun and dynamic. However, when a Mantis ults, who notices? It's not like Luna, where this big, bright, neon, seizure-inducing circles around her. Instead, it's this faint green aura that barely feels like anything. A Storm aura is more noticeable. I just don't think Mantis ult is actually ultimate enough, it just kinda happens. And since it has the same effect as Luna Snow's, I'd really enjoy if she just had something different that actually matched her plant design. Even something simple, like a coked up version of her heal and damage boost being applied to one target at once.
And finally, there's one character left who I think is the peak of Marvel Rivals hero design. A character who's got such flexibility in his kit, a really intuitive gameplay style, and a character who is way better than my first impressions of his visual design led me to believe. And Spylo already talked about him with all the same thoughts that I have. Sure, I can do it in the funnier accent.
Bucky is just so fun, none compare in the Rivals cast to me. I didn't expect this considering he looks like a male manipulator version of Punisher, but honestly the best part of his kit is all in the gun and how everything revolves around it perfectly. The projectile and slightly AoE nature makes it really satisfying to my hitscan hating projectile DPS brain, but the ammo capacity on it turns ammo into an actual resource, something I often find it doesn't feel like in a lot of shooter games, which is strange when you think about it. Either way, you need to manage your shots well, and you're punished for missing them since the downtime that creates is immense, but then this is offset by all abilities reloading your weapon. This interaction alone gives each ability a new consideration. Do you use it now for the reload, or do you want to hold on to it for a situation that it would be better suited for? And that's ignoring the bonus health it gives him, which has a similar effect as well. And then each ability is so flexible in its nature, yet they're all such intuitive tools. The dash is mobility, CC, and damage all in one. It can be a positioning tool, a way to finish someone off, or just a way to bully the Magneto who's eating your bullets. The hook is not only the most balanced hook I've seen since Thresh in League, but also one that plays perfectly into all aspects of his kit. You can try hook someone, then push them further out of position with a dash. You can use your E, which slows enemies and also knocks down flyers, to set up an easier hook. Or maybe you just need to hook for a brief reload and a slight stun on an enemy in a close range duel. And that E, piercing enemies with a slow, is so fun. You need to make the choice of going for the best angle to slow the whole team, or maybe just save it to knock down that skybox Iron Man who's pelting you from the North feckin' Pole. And then his ultimate. I will admit, maybe a little much, but fuck you, I don't care. I am God when I use this thing. There is no word I love to hear more at this point than just again. It's so fun to get the massive chains with it. If there was a character in Marvel Rivals that could be described as Combo the character, I'd say Bucky is at least in the top 3. There is no sequence to his abilities like Venom. You can start and end with any of them and it will work in the right situation. It's the best way a character could be designed, and I'm probably going to be a Winter Soldier main. They added patch notes just as I finished editing this video, and some of the characters I mentioned in it were there, so let's have a look. Thor got a buff to his health and his ult can't be cancelled anymore. It doesn't change anything in regards to my thoughts on him, so I have no comments. They're nice changes, I suppose, but they don't really target the big problem that I have. Storm's changes completely flip what I said about her lack of damage. She is going absolutely crazy now, which I'm definitely enjoying. Despite that, I still wish her aura was addressed. Both making it a cylinder and swapping between them, not cancelling your current action, would be really nice, but with how massive these buffs are to her actual ability of damage, I gotta say it's really hard to complain. The final mention I have is for Winter Soldier, and all these are just nice, but I don't think they were needed, though I'm definitely gonna have fun with them either way. The hero design of Marvel Rivals is something a nerd like me adores. There's so many characters who are near universally agreed on as incredible, and others where it's nearly impossible to see people in agreement. It's such an interesting discussion topic that I'd love to do more of.
Well, surely after all that opinion giving, that angry mob outside should be a little bit less angry and a little more mob. Let me check. So, turns out they're not an angry mob for the reasons that I thought they were. It's just a protest against respiratory systems. Ah, for fuck.